As a comics creator, I'm always looking to increase my production speed without sacrificing quality. Say I'm painting a big vista, trees, mountains, water, all that stuff. It would take forever to paint every individual blade of grass or every leaf on a tree. But would that make the comic more fun to read anyway? Or would it actually slow readers down? Too much detail can be tiring for the eye, and at that rate I'd only be able to release one issue per year. Until the past 2 years in my career, I've underused brushes because I have a fear of them, sort of like I do with reference. I'm worried that I'll become over dependent on them, that I'll be cheating somehow. However, lately I've been thinking of brushes as a time saver, a shortcut more than a cheat. Say I had to draw 1,000 blades of grass. Once my hand learns the technique after 99 blades of grass, what's the point of spending a half hour rendering the other 900 by hand? If I'm going to be making these strokes anyway, why not create a shortcut? Most readers would neither notice nor care. And again, in comics, it's all about quality and quantity. We aren't just making one panel, we're making dozens, hundreds. Think of it like fast travel in an RPG. You've reached one town to another on foot. You've seen all the scenery, but you just need to go back and forth now. So what's wrong with using a shortcut? In this case, we're asking Photoshop to do something we would have done anyway. Up until this point, I've shown an image painted with a few sample brushes. Let's go back in time, and I want to show you guys how I got there. I'm going to be using Photoshop CS6, but I'm sure most of these options are available in any version, and across other software as well. We're going to start with, right now we have a round brush, a basic round brush. First tip that I'm going to have is that you hold Alt and right click on your mouse, and you can dynamically increase or decrease the size of your brush. I did not know that until recently, and that's a huge lifesaver. So we're going to be playing heavily with brush settings. And let's say we have a scene here, and I want to create a bunch of blades of grass on top of a gray background. And then I'll do more later. So we've got a basic round mechanical brush with no special settings on it. It's very boring. It's very default. I want to make a bunch of blades of grass. Oh, wrong layer. Blah, blah, blah. This is very boring, right? But let's say I made a bunch of strokes, and I want to copy those to save time. I'm going to use my Move tool, which is V, and then I'm going to hold Alt and drag that layer. And now we've made a copy of the grass layer. And you can do that as many times as you want. Turn off auto select. Blah, 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 whatever, right? I'm just making a copy of that original layer. And obviously that would take a lot of time, and these particular blades of grass don't look great, but that doesn't matter right now. So you could do that ad nauseum. Make as many blades of grass as you want, and that would take a long time. But you can actually make a brush out of that grass, this original grass. Select the grass, only the grass. And what we'll do is go to Image Crop. Let's see what we're going to do. Let's change the height to 100 pixels. We have resized the image, and this is the stamp that we're going to be creating our brush out of. So we'll get rid of the gray, turn off the gray, or you could fill it with white. And you're going to go to Edit. I actually clicked on the wrong thing just a second ago, so I made another piece of grass. You're going to go to Edit, Define Brush Preset. Like that. And what it does is it basically takes a photo of whatever image is there and creates a brush out of it. And then we'll play with presets and stuff like that. So We still have our grass layer. I'm going back to my brushes, and at the bottom of your list, it should say grass 1. And now every time I click, you got a piece of grass, right? But I'm using my tablet here, my tablet pen. So I could tap, tap, tap individually, or click or press down and drag, right? And there's a million different settings now that we can play with our grass. So we're going to go to Brush Settings. And you have all these options here on the left that we can play with. So for instance, and it's a little cramped on the screen here, but it's all here for you to see. For instance, let's say, see how often it repeats that grass? Let's say I want to make that more spaced out. So we're going to increase the spacing. And there's any number of percentage. And now I'm just going to click and drag. See the difference? And if we lower the spacing, it's all very close together. And that's just basically how often Photoshop tells the cursor, this is how many times I'm going to put that stamp down. You can even put it down so low that it looks like a solid line. And you can make all kinds of shapes that you want. Now, there's a lot of settings that you can play with. And we're only going to be touching the very surface of it here. But let's say, for instance, we want to create a grass texture where I'm going to click and drag, but also I want things like the angle to change. So we're going to go to Shape Dynamics, and there's a control here called Angle Jitter. And if you can see, as I'm changing the value, it rotates the grass. And jitter basically means the amount that it rotates the stamp. You can automate that, or you can create a control. So we're going to have angle jitter off for now and set it to pen tilt. So what I'm doing is I'm tilting my hand. It's now vertically. It's pointed towards me. The back is pointed towards me. If you can see, the grass is pointed, it's vertical. But now I'm going to tilt my hand. You can see the cursor is now moving. It's now facing another direction. And you can see I'm rotating the pen, rotating the pen. It's a little choppy, I'm sorry. And now I can create even more patterns by just rotating my hand. You can also automate this. So angle jitter is 0 right now. But if you slightly increase the angle jitter, I'll keep it vertical, I'm not moving my hand. You can see that it is automatically changing the direction of the grass. So that adds a little bit of randomization to your grass. And now we'll go back to spacing a little bit. And Photoshop is now randomizing my grass for me so that it doesn't look like you're using a brush. And I'll switch to a white. Switching to black, I'm hitting X. And we have a pretty basic patch of grass right here. And it's all being done automatically. Now imagine if you had to do all those scratches by yourself, by hand. What's the point? You know, does it make someone enjoy the picture more? That's a great looking patch of grass right there. And that's only 2 colors. That's in a little bit, we're going to use more colors. But there are some more settings that we might be able to play with. Things like size jitter. Size jitter is how, let's say, pen pressure and minimum diameter. These are connected right here, size jitter and minimum diameter. Let's say by the smallest amount is going to be 50% of the size. Or no, let's be dramatic. I'm pressing very, very lightly. See how small that grass is? And now I'm going to press heavy. So now we have the angle jitter with my pen tilt. It's rotating the shape. And depending how hard I press, you can get a lot of grass, small grass, big grass. It's pretty randomized, right? That's really cool. So So I'm switching colors. Again, I'm randomizing the size. And again, you can tell Photoshop to randomize the size for you, regardless of your pen pressure, by playing with this slider right here, percentage. But I like to have control, so I have my pen pressure as the control. The harder I press, the bigger the size. The lighter I press, the smaller the size. And that's just a preference thing. So what you're doing is creating the illusion of randomization. You're telling Photoshop, here are some controls that I'm going to use, the same way you would hold a physical paintbrush. And depending on the angle that you're coming down on the pen and the pressure, you're creating different sizes of blades of grass based on, I'm just going to click with my mouse here, that one stamp. This one shape created all this. Just like regular blades of grass that are approximately the same size. This is just a shortcut. I don't recommend, if you're new at it, I don't know if I recommend doing it. There's a lot of tricks that you're going to miss by taking this shortcut. So I would say learn how to draw grass manually, and then we'll come back. And then you can come back and use these techniques. There are other tricks in your brush options, like scattering. Just by clicking scattering and playing with these settings, if you look at the thumbnail, you can spread it out. So you get lots of patches of grass. I'm just going to click and drag. Look at all the grass that's appearing with one stroke. And you see how it's randomized and different sizes and everything? That's because of the shape dynamics, the size jitter, angle jitter. It looks so natural, as if I clicked a million times. So my challenge to myself, my younger self, worrying about, like, is this dishonorable to do? Not necessarily if it's a shortcut, but I would not let this be my finished piece. I would use it as a sort of blueprint, and then I would paint grass on top of this so that it looks unique. But anyway, scattering is a good tool to use. Another one that I like to use, another setting, is transfer. Transfer is basically related to transparency. So let's say I'm going to turn off size jitter for a minute, and I'm going to drag the cursor very lightly. So you can barely see the grass here, right? Light pressure. I'm on transfer, opacity jitter, and pen pressure. So now pen pressure is also controlling the darkness, the opacity. Let's say I even want to put a splash of color here now. Very lightly showing up. And I'm pressing a little harder now, pressing a little lighter right here. So there's all kinds of different options. And again, we're only doing this from the one shape we created. Here's another setting that I like, color dynamics. So let's say you have two colors of grass that you really enjoy. We've got our green, and let's say some grass can be yellow sometimes, right? So we've got a setting here in color dynamics that is foreground and background jitter. And let's say I want to control that with pen pressure, the same way we did the opacity. And it's going to go from background to foreground depending on how hard I press. So color A is yellow, color B can be like a nice green. So I'm going to press very lightly, and we get a yellow. Now I'm going to press hard, lots of yellow. I'm going to press lightly again, get some green. I'll turn off transfer, sorry. Getting mostly green, and now I'm going to press hard, getting yellow. And you can, again, randomize this. You notice these are not just the green that I selected. This is because we have a setting called Hue Jitter, which is this, hue. Saturation is this slider right here, which is basically left and right on the color square, the color wheel. Brightness is up and down. Purity, I'm not so sure about. I don't use that one. But I'm sure I'll make a tutorial about that someday. But anyway, you can create all kinds of settings where all of these values are randomized. So I want to make a patch of grass with all these randomized colors now. Semi-randomized. And you're creating a patch just by, I'm clicking and dragging my mouse. Imagine how much time it would have taken to manually do that. And I used to do that manually, but then I realized in concept art for games, like, what's the point? If people just want to see grass and it feels nice to look at the grass, and then you can always go on top of this and like smudge them. Here's my smudge tool. Get in there and start smudging. And then you can, I'm going to take my pencil tool and put some grass here. You know, there's all these different things you can do on top of your existing textures. So these are just little tricks. Let's see, are there any other? No, let's move on to clouds. So I'm going to take a basic mechanical brush that we had before. Let's go with a soft one this time. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing we did before. We're going to create a cloud shape that we're going to clone a bazillion times to create lots of clouds. And I'm going to just change the settings of this default brush because I want transfer. So I'm going to create a very small cloud shape. I'm just pressing, light pressure, and whatever shape you end up with is completely up to you. And again, the grass, I'll show you my actual grass brush later. That's not what it really looks like. A cloud, to me, I suppose, has a bit of a edge to it. Nah, whatever, that's fine. So I'm gonna select it, crop it, image size. Let's make that a reasonable size, like, I don't know, 100, 150. And we're going to actually take a snapshot of this cloud now. So I don't know if it works with white on blue, so I'm going to change the background to white again, and then change the cloud to black by pressing Control I. I'm going to invert the cloud. I'm going to just do a little bit of cleanup here. And maybe actually that'll be fine. All right, so now this is the shape we're going to make a brush out of. Edit, define brush preset, cloud 1. Go to our brushes, cloud 1. And I'm just going to click with my mouse to show you what our stamp looks like. Clicking once, lots of clouds. And now I'm going to click and drag with my pen. Right, you could create a bunch of shapes, right, like that. Spacing seems okay to me. I like that little edge, that cloudy edge if I drag. So I'm going to keep spacing low. That's nice. Shape dynamics. I don't mind the size. Let's keep the size. I'll keep the size as is. I like transfer, especially for clouds, so I'm going to press very lightly and then hard. So you can see there's like a sort of, now it looks more like a cloud, right? There's another setting that you could use called wet edges. That kind of simulates watercolor. You see the edge? I'm going to press real hard, lightly, not so much, you can't see it. But when you press hard, it creates a sort of darkened edge as if watercolor ink or pigment is collecting on the edges. So that's a cool setting if you like watercolor. I personally don't use it too much. You can do color dynamics. So let's say a real cloud might have a kiss of purple and the other color will be white. So now we've got a little bit of white with purple mixed, and we're creating a sort of cloud that has all those colors in it. And this is just the base of a cloud. So I'm playing with transfer, which is controlled by pen pressure. It's a little hard to see. Let me turn off color dynamics for a second. I've got a white cloud that I'm just going to control with my pen pressure. Light on the edges. So you see, there's a lot of different settings you can play with, and I'm not going to give anybody It's like a teach a man to fish kind of thing. Instead of giving you these brushes, I'm going to show you how to make the brushes for yourself. I think that's a way better lesson. But I think that's pretty cool because real clouds do look like this, right? And I'm just playing with pressure and the angle of my brush. Just bouncing the brush on the tablet here. So using these two brushes that we made just now, I'm going to create a scene. And I'm going to fast forward through that right now. And there you go. That's basically it. Obviously, this was a rushed little drawing, but you can do any kinds of... All of my art is basically done with little brushes like these, or I might go down my list in a second of my simple brushes that I use pretty much all the time, aside from these. Because these brushes are nice, but they're kind of crutches. So what I'm going to do is bring in my actual brushes that I use. By the way, when you create a brush and you want to save it, always be sure to click, I'm right clicking on the canvas, and then you want to click on this icon right here. And that's an odd way to do it, but that's how you save your brushes. So we have the default brush here, which just does this. And then you got the brush with all the settings over here. So if you want to save your brushes, and of course you do, be sure to click that button. I forgot to tell you about that. So among the brushes that I have here, I have one that sort of behaves like a basic pen, which is shaped like this. And the basic settings are just shape dynamics, and I don't know what smoothing really does. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So it's light pen pressure to heavy pen pressure, right? It's just a basic pen. I use that pen maybe 90% of the time. And what I would use it for in this scene is to break up the monotony of this scene. So we have a lot of grass that looks the same, and I'm going to do little individual strokes. Let's say I'm going to have a mound of grass right here. Take a basic color, just start adding a bunch of individual blades to break up the pattern so that it looks, all we're doing, like with all art really, is you're just tricking the eye of the viewer. So now, that was what it looked like before, kind of boring. Now blades of grass really makes you feel the grass, because that's where the hand applied manual quality comes from. I like this brush a lot. Another brush I use often is a soft round brush, which is not special at all. It's just a circle with pen pressure, right? Light touch, heavy touch. And what I would use that for is maybe smoothing some of these clouds. Let's say eyedrop, and then we're just gonna, break up the patterns a little bit, smooth it out. Another way you can do that is use these brushes. Well, I'll show you first. I have a brush that's similar to hair, like this. If you look at the pattern, it's just a bunch of dots. And that's my blender. So I'm going to hit, what's the hotkey for that? The smudge tool. I'm going to go in there and just kind of rake it over the clouds here to smooth some of that pattern. And you can do, again, you can make your own brushes and your own patterns. I recommend this shape for blending. That's my preference, but you can use whatever shape you like. And whatever, you can do that as much as you like. Won't waste your time. And finally, another one of my favorite brushes is just a chisel. It's a square, rectangle, and you could use it, let's say we want to make one of those famous happy little trees. I'll take a brown or something. It behaves like this. Oh, texture. Light press, heavy press, right? So I'm going to get in there and just kind of give it a little of that. And you might use a chisel brush for one of Ross's famous little cottages like this, maybe. A couple of straight lines, a dark door, like a roof, something like that. I know, that's a bit silly. But anyway, that's something you can put there if you want to. And then finally, you can do things like creating a brush which will allow you to create leaves, tree leaves. Finally, I'm going to add some samples of my latest comic called Bad Dreams, which is available for pre-order right now on Etsy. Description links in the description. And I use all of these techniques, pretty much all of those basic brushes, the pen brush, round, and the chisel, most of the time. But then when I have to do things like clouds and grass and leaves, lots of repeating patterns, I use techniques like this, which are, I think of them more of a shortcut. I used to think of them as cheating, but nowadays it's like, oh, I would make all those strokes anyway, but if I had to draw each blade of grass manually, it's kind of like, what's the point? I have to release this at some time, So anyway, those are all the techniques you could see on Patreon as well. Subscribe, support the channel, but also you could watch me basically upload new pages of Bad Dreams as I'm finishing them, if you're into that sort of thing. But yeah, that's one way to support the channel. You could either buy a book or sub on Patreon, or you could just share this video, like, and all that crap. And yeah, if you want to see more videos like this, let me know, and I'll talk to you next time. Peace.